Good day, learners. I am Dr. Kenny Ade Shoyemi from the Department of Accounting. I am here to anchor Auditing and Assurance Services 2. It is a 3-unit course that is designed for students studying to acquire a Bachelor of Science degree in accounting. It is divided into 6 sections designed to consolidate on initial appreciation knowledge acquired in auditing. Study section 1, audit sampling. At the end of this section, you should be able to explain the meaning of audit sampling, identify the benefits of audit sampling, describe the types of audit sampling, and discuss the processes involved in audit sampling. In designing audit tests and procedure to be carried out, it is necessary for the auditor to ascertain appropriate means for choosing items for the purpose of generating the required audit evidence. In other words, it is mandatory for the auditor to select items that is tested in order to be able to gather sufficient and appropriate audit evidence. There are basically 3 ways by which you can do this. The first one is to select all items, that is 100% check, and of course that is tantamount to checking every items, testing every items. Aside from that, it can decide to select specific items using a predetermined criteria. And of course, the last one is audit sampling. The focus of this lecture, which is study section 1, is on audit sampling. What then is audit sampling? The standards on auditing defines audit sampling as the application of audit procedure to less than 100% of items within an account balance or class of transactions, such that all sampling units have chance of selection. It will enable the auditor to obtain and evaluate audit evidence about some characteristics of items selected in order to form or assist in forming a conclusion concerning the population from which a sample is drawn. Basically, the following factors determine the degree of audit sampling: the effectiveness and the efficiency of internal control system of a client. If an internal control system of a client is seen to be working as documented, then you could relax on the audit sampling. But if otherwise, you increase the audit sampling. Again, another one is the materiality or the significance of a transaction to the whole of financial statements. I must quickly note that materiality is a big word in accounting and by extension in auditing. It is a relative term that is very, very important, especially in audits. Remember, the audits is how to detect material misstatement in the accounts. By way of it, the materiality of a particular item goes a long way into determining whether you want to sample, or you want to increase your sample, or you want to dump your sample. Aside from that, the value and volume of item of transaction also goes a long way. The purpose for which the audit is done, the cost of sample testing is another factor that is very, very important whenever we are talking about audit sampling. The risk factor is another one. The probability of risk or irregularity in an account or class of accounts will also determine the extent to which audit sampling is relating thereto. For instance, cash receipts and payments for greater scope for commission and irregularities, and therefore require more intensive and extensive sample testing than other accounts where degree of risk involved may be relatively low. So in other words, the higher the risk, the higher the chances of increasing your sample size, or perhaps you want to dump audit sampling and do 100% selection. Again, another thing that is very important is the past experience of the auditor. One thing that we cannot do away easily is the experience of the auditor. It serves as a very good determinant. For instance, if in the past he had come across a greater number of irregularities in, say, cash payment, then it's advisable to pay closer attention to cash payment in subsequent years as well. And of course, another one is unusual or one-off items. These are very, very key in doing all these things. Features of a good sample. Remember, the essence of sample is to be able to identify and conclude on a particular characteristic which you are going to extend to the population. So the following are the features of a good sample. 1, it must be random, meaning that each item of the population should have an equal chance of being selected. Aside from that, it must be representative. The sample should be representative of the items in the whole population. Again, a good sample must be protective of the auditor who is out to also conduct sample, and of course other kinds of tests. More intensive auditing should occur on high value items known to be of high risk. Again, it should be unpredictable. One very important thing is the auditor should not be predicted by management, otherwise there may be a problem. Clients should not be able to know or guess which item will be examined. Let's look at the types of audit sampling. Generally, audit sampling can be classified into 2: statistical sampling or non-statistical sampling. When you talk of statistical sampling, it is also known as probability sampling. It involves the use of mathematical probabilities in selecting the sample. That is, mathematical rules, expectations, and the rest of them. It also allows the sampling risk involved in the sample selected to be quantified and results evaluated. A very key term that is coming out here is sampling risk. Of course, there is nothing as good as observing or testing the whole population. So which means by sampling, it is associated with sampling error, which is being referred to as sampling risk. The various statistical sampling are simple random sampling. It is also known as the lottery method. Here, not only that the elements of population are known, each has an equal chance of being selected. The use of random numbers most of the time is a good example here. Aside from simple random sampling, we have the random systematic sampling, also referred to as the constant skip method. It is not a totally random sample, as only the first element is randomly selected. To use this technique, the population element are serially numbered to the upper limits. The population size is then divided by the sample size to obtain the sample interval. To select subsequent elements, the interval is added to each succeeding number. This is repeated until the required sample size is obtained. Again, we have the multi-stage sampling, and this is used where the population is large, therefore making the simple random sampling ineffective or impracticable. This technique is usually carried out at the 2 or more stages, with each stage reducing the sample until a final working sample is arrived at. Aside from multi-stage and the rest of them, we also have a cluster, or what is referred to as block sampling, or also known as area sampling. It is useful when the population subjects cluster into a small group which needs to be sampled at a random. However, it will be required that a proportionate or disproportionate sample unit may be taken from each cluster. Another good one is stratified sampling. When the population displays different strata, each of which is expected to be sampled, this technique is desirable. However, in choosing from each strata, the auditor may decide to adopt either a uniform sampling fraction or a variable fraction. I must confess that each of these has advantages and disadvantages. But however, let us look at the advantages of the statistical audit sampling as it were globally. Number one, remember here we are applying the rule of mathematical probabilities. That is exactly what we are applying. So by so doing, it is more scientific. And so the first advantage is that it reduces the sample size to the minimum required to meet the objective of the audit test. Aside from that, just like I said, it is then scientific, and the results obtained can be quantified and also verified, and even most times justified as well. It also leads to a uniform standard among different audit firms. That's another very, very good advantage. Again, audit risk under here is minimized at minimum. Again, aside from that, it can be used by junior staff who may be unable to apply the judgment required by judgmental sampling or the non-statistical sampling, which is basically the application of the judgment in selecting all these things. In other words, junior staff that are inexperienced may not be able to have enough experience to be able to select, so they could easily use any of these probability sampling. Again, statistical sampling methods, they are unbiased. Remember, it's scientific, it's unbiased, it is rigid to that particular listing. Again, the advantages, using probability sampling is also associated with disadvantages, and among them, it is not cost effective when used by small clients. Again, the sample selection may be time consuming, very, very time consuming. It is not even easy to understand and use. Remember, it is mathematics, which is usually being abhorred by most. It is not easy to understand and use. Again, it requires special knowledge of statistics for you to use it. There are rules associated with probabilities. Again, it is inflexible, very, very inflexible, because it's rigid in a way. It is rigid. Now, let us look at the non-statistical sampling, which is also known as judgmental sampling. Here, the auditor dumps the use of mathematical rules and hinges slightly on his judgment based on his experience and exposure to client's operating system. It does not attempt to qualify sampling risk, but rather picks on those items which he or she believes will provide the most useful information in the particular circumstance. In other words, here the auditor judgment is what is brought to play here. And of course, in auditing, experience matter, especially with respect to a particular client that you have been the auditor over the years. You must have been well abreast with their accounting system, even general operating system. So you could easily say that this is a particular place that has high audit risk, hence you know what to do in that area. So the advantages are, of course, one, it is simple to use and understand, unlike the one that has to do with rules of mathematics and probability. Again, it is more appropriate for small audits. There is no special skills of statistics that is required. No time is spent on playing with mathematics and all the rest and statistics. But however, there are associated advantages. Number one, it is unscientific, so you cannot verify. Again, no quantitative results are obtained. Personal bias too, it's unavoidable. Evidence from sampling is usually vague. And of course, the method impedes the standard of audit sampling procedure. Having said this, let us look at the steps involved in audit sampling. Of course, the first thing that the auditor will do is to planning the sample. And in doing that, the following are taken into consideration. Number one is the objective of the audit tests. What objective is set out to achieve? That's the first one. Again, definition of the attributes and exceptional conditions is also very, very important. They're also very, very important. Again, setting of a tolerable error ab initio prior to starting the testing, because this is what you are going to now use to benchmark at the end of the day. Again, specify the acceptable risk. Again, define the population. Very, very key. In fact, the characteristics of the population goes a long way in choosing or in selecting which sampling techniques you want to use. And of course, having done that, you define the the sample size. After planning of a sample, the next thing is to select the items based on what, if you have given consideration to all what have been said earlier, then you select the items to be tested. And having done that, you perform your audit test and procedure. The tests that you seek to perform, you do it to be able to gather sufficient and appropriate audit evidence. Very, very important. Then again, after that, after the performance of the audit test, then you evaluate the result. And this is drawing conclusion based on the tests. Of course, it involves comparison of actual errors to deviations. You know, it is very important. When you say you are comparing actual errors with deviations, these are stated with a compliance test and substantive tests. You could have deviations in the compliance test and the actual error in substantive tests. So assessment of sampling risk, you try to assess sampling risk, and of course you conclude on the target characteristic, which is the ultimate goal of the sampling. That is, you conclude on the target characteristics of the population, and of course you do your generalization to the population of what you now intend studying. However, in conclusion, as good as audit sampling is, and of course as good as audit sampling is being recommended, because audit is not, you don't guarantee, audit you don't certify, it's an opinion based. So there are some instances where no matter what, 100% check is still desirable, and these are the circumstances. Number one, where the items are few but they are material. Very, very important. They are few, they are material. So why doing sampling? So go ahead and, you know, since they are few. Again, where the auditor is put upon inquiry, you have to prove to the bottom. So when you are put upon an inquiry in a particular area, you have to go ahead and dump all the sampling and do 100% check. Again, when the items are extraordinary in nature, or when they are unusual, or when they are one-off, you also dump sampling and do 100% check. Thank you very much. I will see you in the next study section.